Hey everybody, we are doing a holiday series, which we were going to call Crime on Crime, but that seemed to imply something wildly different than what this is. We're calling it, I guess, Podcasters on Podcasters, but there are about
That's not better.
20, yeah, 20 true crime podcasters getting together in small groups and just talking about podcasting, true crime, all things that you hopefully want to hear about. I'm here today with Alvin Williams from Affirmative Murder and Javier Leiva from Pretend. Hey guys, how's it going?
What's going on, Josh? How
Hey,
you doing, Javier?
what's up? What's up?
Well, why don't we, since we're running this on all of our feeds, and I know, everybody knows everything about all of us, but just in case someone doesn't, tell everyone about your shows. Javier, why don't you start?
All right, I'll go first. I started in 2017 my podcast Pretend. It's about people pretending to be someone else. So I interview con artists, undercover agents, anybody like living a double life or using deception. And it's a cool little theme because I could really flex either way. But I've been doing it for almost 8 years now, and it's awesome.
Fantastic podcast, by the way.
Yeah,
Oh,
my
thank you, man.
partner who hates true crime loves your podcast. He was like, I could listen, he could do 20 seasons. I was like, yeah, that's the beauty of what he's doing.
That's awesome. Very
Um,
cool.
I do a podcast called Affirmative Murder. We also started around 2017, around that time. I feel like it was the Halloween of that year. It just was like spookiness in the air, listening to other true crime podcasts. We tend to focus on podcasts that don't get a ton of media coverage for a variety of reasons, whether it's sexual orientation, color, gender, those kind of things. It leans comedy, but we try to be as respectful as possible, and we tend to focus on just getting the message out there about the people that are affected by these cases.
And I do true crime bullshit, which I've been, for better or worse, investigating Israel keys for a decade. And I launched that in 2018. It was my fourth podcast, but the only one that ever made any money. So here we are.
Just grizzled and jaded, man. Like you're so you're inundated. I respect how deep you've gotten into that case because a lot of times this stuff will it'll suck all the, I don't know if fun's the word to use, but we're doing something we enjoy to do, but you go so deep. It's such a passion project. I respect how deep you've gone on that.
But I
Thanks. Yeah,
gotta
I was
tell
talking.
you, oh, sorry. I was gonna say, as awesome as true crime bullshit is, my favorite Josh Hallmark podcast is Playlist, which has not been around for a while, but it was such a great excuse for podcasters to get together and listen to their favorite music. It was cool.
I've heard great things. I've heard great things.
Yeah.
It was fun. I want to resurrect it. It's just harder now because I think
Yeah.
we really extended the definition of fair use with that
Oh yeah.
podcast.
It's hard to put it anywhere. You do it, and there's like, where do we put this? So just
Yeah.
Yeah.
billboard hits on.
But I would love to, because I think like, and that's part of the reason we're doing this little series. It's like it brought podcasters together. I think a lot of people
Yeah.
made friends in the industry because of that show. Not to like
I think
pat
so.
myself on the back, but it was cool. It was an excuse for all of us to get together and like get to know each other outside the context of, terrible things happening to good people.
Sure.
Well,
Um,
Josh, we were joking because we did another collaboration and we were joking that you're our fearless leader. A lot of people don't realize, but like in the indie community, you're running a pyramid scheme and Josh Hallmark is at the top of it.
that's funny. I feel like I'm not big enough to be a fearless leader, but I'll take it.
Yeah.
But I guess
I,
that's how most cults start. So
yeah. They're very,
It's subtle. It really
yeah.
creeps into you. I told you when I got to the Berkshires, I was like, I'm in, man. Like, are we moving here? Like, what are we doing? Are we setting up camp? Are we taking this place over? Are we doing that? I mean, like, whatever it is, I'm in.
I mean,
our
the
unassuming cult
subtext
leader.
the subtext of the Berkshire Podcast Festival was essentially like a timeshare sales pitch. So that's the goal. You'll all be here one day living in my backyard.
That's right.
So I guess speaking of getting into true crime, how did you guys, get into this? I think it's one thing to like have an interest in true crime, and then another thing that involves, I think, a little bit of hubris and ego to be like, I should start a podcast. Um, so Alvin, why don't you kick us off?
So in 2017, the very successful podcast My Favorite Murder was kind of like the dominant voice of couch detectives, I would say. Like, like, oh, they make it look like anybody could do it. And I heard their podcast, and I'd been a fan for a while, and I was like, I feel like I can offer a different perspective. And so I bought some crappy equipment and asked my friend if he wanted to do it. And he also listened to that podcast amongst with several other ones. And he was like, sure. And that's kind of all a podcast is. You're just like, you find somebody else, or you do it on your own, but you're just like, I'm just going to do this. And that's the freedom of it, even though there's a responsibility to, progress. But I mean, the impetus of my podcast was, hey man, I like talking. Like I'll try to talk about some things that I find interesting. And it's been almost a decade later. And so yeah.
Did you ever have that moment where you're like, I'm gonna do this, and then you start creating it, and then you're like, wait, I should not be doing this.
So many times. I mean, it's I mean, like editing, learning all the new things, realizing how long like 20 minutes is. Like when you have to fill time and you're like, I think I'm going to do an hour podcast. And then you've been talking for 8 days and you look at the little minutes counter and it's been 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And your 15 minutes, especially early on, you guys both know, it's a bunch of like, what else should I say? Yeah, and it's just a lot of just fumbling. And even in the fumbles, you've cultivated about 15 minutes of work. And then when you learn to edit, that gets whittled down in 7 minutes. And you're like, how am I going to fill this time? So many times I was like, why am I doing this? I'm just in my basement. Who's listening? All of those things come to mind so many times.
So many times people will be like, I don't understand why it's 45 minutes. Why can't it be an hour? And you're like, because those 15 minutes feel like 10 days.
Oh my God.
Javier, what about you?
Well, I'm going to give a different answer because I think my audience is sick and tired hearing of my origin story. But honestly,
But our audiences aren't.
oh, that's true. Well, I'll give you like the Cliff Notes version. So my cousin, he's a con artist, and he was getting ready to go to federal prison. I knew he was
tired of this story.
Yeah, I guess I'm tired of this story.
I've known you for almost a decade, and this is the first time I'm hearing this.
Okay, well, let's go into it, I guess. So then my cousin, he's getting ready to go to federal prison. He's the black sheep of the family. Everybody knows he's the bad guy, but nobody knows exactly what he did. And so around that same time, I was thinking about starting a podcast. And so I sat down with him. I said, Eric, could you tell me what you did? And he told me everything he did, from breaking into cars to breaking into houses to staging car accidents for insurance fraud, to all the way to he bought a medical clinic, hired a real doctor to write opioid prescriptions. And that's how he got busted. And so he went to federal prison, and he describes it as Club Med. He did yoga, played tennis, had a balcony, met world leaders that were incarcerated with him. I mean, it was nuts. But the answer I was going to give was that I used to work in news, like in the early 2000s. I was in TV news, and nothing beat that rush of finding the story. Or I remember one time my reporter was chasing down this crooked pastor, and I'm like running with this heavy beta camera that weighed like 50 pounds, and the tripod was made out of pure steel, and I'm like chasing this guy, and like nothing replaces that rush. And so then I got out of news, I got a real job, and it was just so boring. Like nothing compares to being out in the field getting in trouble. And so I just thought, hey, you know what? Podcasting was kind of rolling out around. I mean, it was around for a while, but like it just gave me a platform to try to do news again. And suddenly, like, life got a lot more interesting, a little too interesting.
Well, I was gonna say the one, like, you and I have like pretty similar, I think, stories and trajectories in podcasting. But the one thing I'm always envious of is like you are fearless and very curious. Like I think my curiosity has slowly been beaten down by this industry. Like
Yeah.
I don't want to ask any more questions, but
Yeah.
I really appreciate that you don't seem to give a fuck. You were like, oh yeah, sure, I'll go hang out with a cult, or like, yeah, sure, I'll target this woman who's been an online bully and a liar and a sociopath.
Well, sometimes I do it out of pure ignorance, right? So like I start scratching the surface, thinking everything's safe, everything's cool. And then I get so deep into it that how could I turn down the invitation from the cult leader, right? Like how could I not like complete the job? And like Alvin, like you said, like, whoa, am I a little in over my head?
Yeah.
Like why me? Why am I doing this? I'm just one guy. And so like, yeah, I have those those questions all the time, like, what the hell did I just get myself into?
But I think that that's cool that like you keep the wonderment. I think that's
Yeah.
what's great about
Yeah.
podcasting. Like even if you do it part time, if it's something you do as a as a little side thing, it gives you this sense of being a kid again and creating and that fearlessness or ignorance or whatever it is where you're just like, I'll try something because like why not? And
Yeah.
that why not has created some amazing things for people. So I think that that's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I sat down to do like I was living in New York. I was miserable. We had just moved to Brooklyn. I had n no desire to be there whatsoever. I had kind of there was like a long con on my boyfriend's part that I'm still like disappointed he was able to like bamboozle me. But I was there and I was miserable and we'd just done this road trip and I was like, I don't know, we were listening to all these podcasts. I have nothing to do. I can't find work because I was in like such a niche industry back in Seattle, and I was like, maybe I'll just like try to write a podcast episode. And I think there is that thing where you have this curiosity about how something is going to go, and you have like a general curiosity in the world, and you're like, I don't know, I'll just try it and see what happens. And this thing that felt like a flippant, like I'm going to do this because I'm bored and miserable, became a career. It's wild.
Yeah.
But
It's
Josh, you mentioned that you and I have a lot of similarities in terms of our approach. I think it's safe to say that neither one of us, and I can't speak for Alvin because I don't know you very well, but like, I don't think we're true crime fans, right? Like,
No.
No,
is that
it's you nailed me. I mean, it's and maybe I was more so in the beginning, but when it becomes something that you digest and breathe and create, the last thing I want to do after I do the podcast is like watch a true crime documentary, unless it's
yeah,
required of me
right?
to do something.
Like it's work now,
Yeah,
right?
because it's so heavy. It's just too.
Right.
It's just so heavy, and it's
Yeah.
real, but it's just if I don't have to consume it, I don't consume it at all, really.
So when you hear a song and it takes you back to a certain place, a certain time, you know that feeling. I
Yeah.
remember the first time I heard True Crime Bullshit. I was hanging Christmas lights. I was on a ladder and I heard Josh
What a
Hallmark.
joyous time to listen to murder.
Yeah. Well, I think did you release it around that time? Because it
Yeah, I
was
think it launched December 5th, which was also like a very
Yeah,
strange
great time.
decision on
Let's
my
launch
part.
this. Yeah, let's
Yeah.
launch.
and I'm hanging Christmas lights, and he had such a sharp critique of the true crime community, and I had never heard that before. And that premise, my God, it was. Do you remember that, Josh? I mean, was that your intent? And like, did you steer away from that because it was a criticism of true crime?
It was totally my intent, and I will never forget it because I got raked over the fucking coals for it. I think it was too early for I think, true crime community writ large to be having those conversations and interrogating their interest in true crime. I think now it would do very well. But I think back then people were like, shut up, I just want to enjoy my murder in peace and not have to like
Feel
analyze
guilty
why.
about it.
It's
Yeah.
a
Yeah,
it's a
totally.
feather ruffling conversation still, but I think we're on the other side of we can have a real conversation about how we consume these things.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think like Michelle McNamara was like a huge part of this like sea change in it, and then I think thereafter like everyone kind of had to analyze how they were contributing to a greater problem, and it's cool because I even show well not even is an understatement shows like Wine and Crime that's supposed to be a comedy is doing such a great job of like subverting how we look at and discuss true crime.
Yes.
Yeah. And do you find that interesting? A lot of these crime and alcohol of choice podcasts, like there's a lot of them, right? Like
Hmm.
Wine and Crime and all these guys, they started out with the intention of like, hey, I like true crime and I like to have some booze when
Yeah.
I consume true crime. And then it seems like a lot of these shows had this like moment of reckoning where they realized this like that responsibility, Alvin, that you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier. It's like, oh shit, this is not like entertainment anymore. Like this is like real people's lives. And I've noticed like a real big shift, even within those podcasts, like the
Yeah.
ones described
There's
that.
there's an awakening that happens for sure because, I mean, when I first started my podcast, it's a I wanted to make sure that my friendship came through and we found our
Right.
times to laugh. But when you do 20 cases about people that have been horribly killed and nobody focused in on it, the funny is hard to find because you start to make the web of like, oh, this is a problem. So before, when you were just drinking wine with your friends and watching Dateline or whatever, that's an activity that you do. But once you start diving in and you start seeing systemic problems and stuff, it's like, oh no, this is not like just campfire stories. This is real, and
Right.
we need to be more careful about how we, disseminate it. So if that doesn't happen for people, I don't see them lasting long. Like if you're 50 episodes in and you're still like, man, and then
Right.
there's blood everywhere, it's like
They
there's
fell down the staircase. Ha ha
yeah,
ha.
like a shift should come if you are really paying attention to what you're talking about.
I remember early in the show, I was at like some true crime event, and they had with the podcasters, they had like vendors, and there was this woman who made dog bandanas, true crime themed dog bandanas, which I guess is the thing someone needed. And there were like cartoon drawings of Ted Bundy with like Ted Bundy phrases on some of them, but the organizer seated her directly next to one of Ted Bundy's only surviving
Oh,
victims.
Yeah.
And I was seated across from him, and I was just like staring at these two booths next to each other, being like, this is so fundamentally fucked.
And
that
that
is.
person will never see what's the issue with what they're like if they're that committed
Oh,
to
I think she saw.
you think
She's,
Yeah, I got to see a reckoning happen in real time. It was amazing.
wow. But yeah, I mean, it's turned into an industry, right? True crime. And I have devoted a lot of time to calling out some of these like true crime vultures. I mean, not just the one that I'm sure we're going to talk about, but like even forensic scientists who, like they have TED Talks and all this stuff that are pretty much promoting junk science out there that's taken really seriously by the law enforcement community. I did this piece on this forensic pathologist that says that he created this machine that if you put the victim's family's fingernail clippings into this machine, that he could find the body, an unmarked grave from like thousands of or hundreds of miles away.
oh,
And
psychic
as
mysticism.
yeah, but you guys are giving me a weird look.
Yeah, this
But actual law enforcement detectives, CSI professionals are taking week-long trainings with this guy, and they think it's real, and then they use it in the field, and sometimes it gets admitted into court. And so, but these are people that are leveraging true crime, and not only as entertainment, but also just to get rich or get
yeah.
famous. It's kind of gross.
It's a weird, actually, and I feel like this is a tough conversation to have, but I think this is the right group. Like, there is a weird thing that happens when you realize like you can make a lot of money off of this. When you're in a position to be like, oh, like I could be more sensationalist, or I could put out more episodes that are, of a lower quality because I'm just churning shit out and make a fuck ton of money. And you kind of like, A, have to reconcile that power and that dynamic within the culture, but also like make a choice of, am I going to do the right thing, or am I going to do the right thing for me? It's
Right.
like, what are your feelings on monetizing this? Because like, A, we all have lives. We have to feed ourselves. This is a full-time job. Like I can't do this and work a day job. It's just
Yeah.
impossible. And so there is this thing of like, hey, if you want the podcast, I have to make money. But there's also this weird thing of like, I'm making money and I'm having like a career high because
Yeah.
of terrible things that happen to people.
Yeah.
I would feel terrible if I were driving like a really fancy car and lived in a mansion or something like that. But at least the podcasters in our tier, like I don't know anybody who's living that lifestyle. Like I don't feel bad about monetizing it because there's just no other way. Like
Yeah.
how would we
Yeah.
give this information to you? There's just no way. And I worked a full-time job for until recently, and now I'm full-time podcaster, and like I have to live, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I have to be able to pay my editors and my producers. Like, how do you expect this stuff to like materialize in your podcast feed?
Yeah. It's a man hours thing for sure. I would agree. I'm not going to say any names about what you were just saying, Javier, but I do know there are
Oh,
definitely
I'm sure
yeah,
there
for sure.
are. Yeah.
And that part that's hard for me to reconcile with, in the sense that like, if you create something that a lot of people like, then I can't judge you for your lifestyle. But if what you create in a way, we all can be honest about it. Like exploiting becomes this negative word in a lot, especially in the context of what we're doing. But things get exploited. Like if I'm talking about something, I am feeding off of the ecosystem of that, you know, that tragedy or whatever it is. But if I take the money that I earn from that and I start living like a rock star and I'm signing autographs and I don't want to talk to people and I have sunglasses on and I buy a big giant truck and it just is a weird. It's weird to present that to the and obviously
Mhm.
your cult following will not care, but somebody who's a victim of this or the person whose family is
Right.
you've profited off of sees you like jumping out of a tricked out truck and going into your mansion, it just it presents the wrong message.
Yeah.
So I feel like, there's nothing wrong with monetizing, but you just have to have integrity. There are
Yeah.
people putting evidence that they've collected behind paywalls. There are people that are rushing to do stories before the evidence has been made apparent, so you're kind of messing up the investigation. I probably could have made a lot of money in the last 3 months just churning out information or stories about Diddy from the dark web and weird memes. I could just do episodes and episodes about P. Diddy. But why would I churn out a machine of misinformation and disinformation? I don't agree with that. Like the point of this is to try to educate people and educate ourselves. So why put out stuff that hasn't been vetted and it could be false for the algorithm?
Right.
Yeah. I get so much shit because I will like get stuff and I'm like, I can't in good conscience put this out into the world. And some asshole actually went to the effort to like FOIA something so that they could release Keys's girlfriend's FBI interviews to the world. And it's like this woman doesn't want to be out in the world. She wants to live a private life. She's been through enough fucking trauma, and you're spending over $1,000 just to release this, what, to like say fuck you to me? And the only
Yeah.
person you're hurting is her. Like,
Right.
So weird. And you're in such a unique position as well because you've spent so much time on a major case. And I've seen people who have done a couple of episodes on a story, and then it pops. Somebody else from another podcast does the story, and they feel this sense of entitlement of like,
Hmm.
this is my backyard or my field, and like, have you experienced people trying to say that you're stepping on their toes or that's that rivalry that you're saying about you know researching a story that's publicly available. Now you being the journalist that you are compared to somebody else, that's a different story, but like this is public information that we're doing. I mean, that's
yeah,
crazy to fight over something like that.
it totally. I've had two very different experiences. One where like early on, and I regret it because I think there's some like ethical ickiness to it. Like at the very beginning, if you join Patreon at a certain level, I would share case files, which I
Sure.
like, you can get them via FOIA, but there just seems something weird
Yeah.
to
It's
be like,
harder.
yeah, monetizing it like not directly, but indirectly. And someone had like joined Patreon, downloaded all the case files, and then started a Keys podcast called
With boy.
with the FOIA, and like they used a similar name to mine, a similar logo. They were using clips from my show, and like that, I was like, dude, like go fuck yourself. But
Yeah.
then like somewhere in the pines, they came out and they were like, we were inspired by your show, and there was an impulse to be like, but it's like, dude, like fuck me, like
Yeah.
I don't own this, and then I was like, dude, I could like be mad about this or like stonewall them, or I could say like, hey, you have new ideas, you have interesting ideas, let's work together, and that's
Yeah.
what we've done now.
That's cool.
I think that that's awesome. Like, I mean, because um, in a broader sense, I've talked to like detectives and stuff about this when I go to some of these conventions about the use of private citizens who have a passion for this. Like, it's a tool that's available, and a lot of us and them people that listen to true crime are dogged investigators. They don't sleep. They will go to the ends of the earth to investigate something that they find a passion for. And so I always like to ask other people in the industry, like what are your thoughts on that becoming more of a used tool, because it can be a dangerous weapon, but it can be a tool. And how you feel about like departments and investigators reaching out to couch detectives, if you will?
What do you think, Javier? Because I think, for me, it's very singular. For you, you've done a bunch of investigations.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. When we talk about like these investigations and being pulled in the in multiple ways. Like I was just thinking about a case that because I don't even look for stories anymore. I'm sure you guys don't either. It's like the audience just suggests it over and over again. And I have now created these standards for myself of what I will cover and what I won't cover. Like I've never spelled it out in the show, but like, if it's a public figure, I'm gonna cover it because I feel like public figures need to be held accountable.
Yeah.
But if it's just like a private person, I always wrestle with that because there's so much drama like with regular people and people want to use your show to air their other people's dirty laundry. And that's something that I never want my show to become like the Jerry Springer show or anything like that. So like I'm constantly wrestling and creating these rules that I never had. It's like this charter that I never created at the beginning, but that I'm writing as I go along
Yeah.
of what I will cover and what I won't cover. And yeah, it's a constant struggle, right?
Wait, so
I've had
you get a lot of emails from people that are like, my neighbor's a con artist, and there's just
Oh
like
yeah.
bad. They're
Well,
just a
no,
bad neighbor.
I mean, and sometimes I'll do it, right? Because like if there's court documents and police records to back that stuff up, and I feel like that's okay because there is a case to be made that you're warning somebody else about a person that could be a predator out there that's taking advantage of people. I
Yeah.
remember this one story, and it was this guy that called me, and he thought I was going to pay him for the story. Like that was his first question. He's like, How much are you going to pay me for this?" And I'm like, "I'm not going to pay you anything." And usually that's a red flag because I'm like, "Whoa, okay." This guy's coming in with weird motives. But then his other motive is that he really, really hates his ex-wife. And so he wants to throw her name out there. But I covered the story anyway there because it was just so freaking crazy. And I had the documents to back it up.
Yeah.
This woman created multiple accounts and phone numbers and all that to really just mess with her husband. Just she was fucking with him for years, okay? And she was working for the lieutenant governor of Georgia, and she even impersonated the lieutenant governor of Georgia. She got into his email account, emailing her husband about stuff. I mean, she was just messing with this guy for years. Now, she wasn't a con artist in the sense that she's a risk to somebody else,
Yeah.
right? Like she's not gonna she had one target, and that was her husband. And so but at the end of the day, when I did that story, instead of her being the villain in the story, he turned out to be kind of like the villain in the story because his motives were so transparent and the wife was very sympathetic. Like he cheated on her all the time. Like women were writing to me like, "Yes, go girl,"
Yeah.
like that's
Guy's a
awesome.
bad person.
So like it kind of blew up in his face. Like I think he intended to air his dirty laundry to get back at his ex-wife, but he ended up looking like the jerk in the end. So
That's where I respect your curiosity and my cynicism gets in the way because I've gotten emails from people and every time I do, I'm like, oh, you just have an axe to grind. And like I
oh,
don't
they
even
all
bother
do.
reading.
But everybody does, right? Like everybody has an angle, everybody has an axe to grind. The important thing is to make sure that you're doing your work to make sure that you get other axes in the picture, right? Like it's not just that one axe. Um, and that happened recently with the LaDonna Humphrey case that I covered. When people approach me with a story about how bad this person is, I'm like, you just want to take this person down.
Right.
But when that one story becomes like 30 stories or something like that, then it becomes like overwhelming. It's like, okay, maybe there's something there, right?
It's funny, I don't want to turn this into the Javier show, but I have
No, we're
so
not.
many questions about this season of Pretend. And I think they're probably different questions than you're used to. So you've had a banner year. You did a whole season on someone in the true crime podcasting community who was scamming people, among many other things, allegedly. And I guess it takes, I think, a lot of balls, for lack of a better word, to be like, I'm gonna do an expose about someone in my community who, like, I know, who my friends know, who is in many circles like a respected voice. What led you to that decision? And then what
Oh.
was that process like as you were investigating her and eventually interviewing her?
I was really scared, actually. I mean, talking amongst podcasters, I'm interviewing one of our own, or like I'm covering one of our own, and even mutual friends of ours are closely related to her. So I wasn't sure like who had close ties to her, or like if I'm putting this out in the world, am I gonna just like completely burn all my relationships with my fellow podcasters? Are all the podcasters out there thinking that I'm gonna come after them next? I was really hesitant about that. And so I think most people would have probably passed on that story. But honestly, I didn't even fully believe all the accusations, and I didn't really understand how bad things were when I actually interviewed LaDonna Humphrey. I interviewed her really not knowing all the details. And when I interviewed her and she gave me a whole hour. Like I had like I think like 7 or 8 pages of questions and she answered every single one of my questions. But her answers weren't explaining away the accusations. They were basically saying, well, the person that says this, well, did you know they did this? Did
Oh,
they, so she was trying to disqualify or discredit her accusers and not really owning up to the accusations made about herself. And that's when I realized, okay, well, there's something here, because I really thought that once I would get her on the phone, that she would explain all this, and it was a big nothing burger. But
yeah.
it turned out that it was a lot more complicated than that. Yeah.
It was a wild thing. I was listening to the bulk of it while I was on a research trip. Like, I cannot explain like how meta and psychologically vexing it was to be like driving around researching keys while listening to your friend interview your other friends about a woman you know and the crimes she has allegedly committed. Like, it was just a total mind fuck, but it was like I it, you've done a lot of amazing work, and I'm great to see you finally get the attention I think you've deserved for years now. But do
Thank you.
you have any feelings about it being on this specific case? Because I think of like your work with the cult, which was so good and so out, like you put yourself out there in ways I don't think you have in other seasons. So do you have any like mixed
Well,
feelings about it?
oh, no, this is like the worst time to ask me that question, because it's like I just wrapped up this monster blockbuster season on LaDonna Humphrey, and I'm thinking, how the heck do I top this? And I always have that problem, by the way. This is like not new. I did the Frank Abagnale thing, and I was like, I'll never find another case like that. And then right around the corner, there was a stalker case that I did, which was crazy. And I'm like, oh no, that was it. And then LaDonna came. And so like right now I'm in one of those moments where like I'm kind of stuck. I had a big story fall through. I'm like scrambling to find new cases. And a lot of the stories that I work on take like 6 months to a year to produce. So it's like I feel like I'm really behind the eight ball. And actually, to answer your question, Josh, and I think you were talking about like going where the algorithm, or like where people want you to go. I actually found another LaDonna Humphrey in our space, and I'm not going to cover it. I mean, it is so juicy, it is so tempting, but I'm
You
not
don't,
even
but
going to touch it.
you don't want to become
Yeah, I don't
that
want.
guy. Yeah,
Right, I don't want to become that guy. And
I get
so
that.
like that's hard, resisting that temptation, knowing that I have like
A
a
great
lot of
story.
little stories, and I
Yeah.
got this crazy potential big story, but I don't want to do it because I don't want that to become my thing.
Yeah.
It's so funny. Like like we're talking about the ethics and respect, but like in the back of my head are like images of a bunch of people in the space. Like, is it him? Is it her? Is it him? Is it... And I'm gonna
Now
have to
you're like
like,
you're going through your Rolodex.
yeah.
I Just like LaDonna, I had no idea who LaDonna was, even though we were all like in the same circles. And this other person, I don't know her personally, but yeah, I mean, same thing. Crime Con, like a big star in the space, and um, shady background. But yeah, not gonna touch it.
Affirmative Murder is brought to you by Incogni. Every year, both the number and scope of data breaches worldwide are rising. According to the 2022 annual data breach report by the Identity Theft Resource Center, the number of victims has gone up nearly 41.5% from 2021. These data thieves are after your personal information, including your name, your aliases, your social security number, login credentials, home address, location history, online activity, and much more. And they're selling it to the highest bidder. And this is where Incogni steps in. Incogni reaches out to the data brokers who are out to purchase your information, and they do it on your behalf. And they request that your personal data be removed. Since many data brokers continue collecting your personal information even after they've removed it, Incogni also does its best to ensure that your data stays off the market by conducting repeated removal requests. This means that whenever a new record pops up on a data broker website, Incogni will automatically take care of that. That's what makes their yearly subscription especially advantageous. Incogni will continue to protect your data privacy for as long as you use the service. It's so easy to look people up these days. We're more accessible than ever, which makes us more vulnerable than ever as well. Incogni's out to protect us. And if you go to incogni.com, incogni.com/affirmative murder and use the promo code affirmative murder, you'll get 60% off an annual plan. Your data and your personal information are more valuable than they've ever been. Do what you can to protect it by signing up for Incogni today. Affirmative Murder is brought to you by Hormone Harmony. Could your daily routine be full of hormone disruptions? There are more than 1,000 hormone disruptors living rent-free in our environment right now. In our food, our water, the air we breathe, the clothes we wear, our skin, and they all mess with our hormones. The good news is, people don't have to suffer through any of it anymore. Because now, there's Hormone Harmony, a formula made only with herbal ingredients that are shown to reduce hormonal symptoms in women of all ages. PMS symptoms, menopause symptoms, poor sleep and feeling tired all the time? A reduced desire for intimacy? Oh yeah, Hormone Harmony can help with all those things. In the over 30,000 reviews for Hormone Harmony, one of the biggest benefits women mention is that they feel like themselves again. Then for a limited time, you can get 15% off your entire first order at happymammoth.com, happymammoth.com, and just use the promo code AMP at checkout. That's happymammoth.com and use the code AMP for 15% off today. Get those hormones in harmony with Hormone Harmony. All right, back to the show.
Alvin, how do you pick your cases? Because you're mostly episodic.
Yeah, well, because we are chronically online, like Javier said, we've gotten to the point now that a lot of people send us stuff, but also sometimes you just come across a crazy TikTok that's like too unbelievable to think that it's true, and then I do like a cursory Google search and I'm like, oh, this is a real story. Now the TikTok might have sensationalized it, but there is something interesting here that like I want to dive into and talk about. Like, yeah, a lot of social media and also just going into like old History Channel documentaries and stuff, and just seeing a name get mentioned in a like an all-encompassing crazy story, and then just kind of like going macro in on that, like just focusing in on that and just trying to see if there's something there. So
you see, Alvin, you're doing the same thing everybody else does. Like they're always on their phone watching these crazy TikTok videos, and then they go down these rabbit holes. You're just doing the same thing. You just have a microphone.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I do the same thing too. That's really the only difference between us and our listeners.
It's a simple process, man. That's why when people ask me, like, when sometimes people ask, like, how do you start a podcast? For one, like, or when you put out a podcast that an episode that somebody feels is like you've directly wounded them, and they're like, somebody should cancel this person's podcast. I'm like, I'm in a closet right now. I'm literally in my closet. Like, what are you talking about? But it's so like, if you just get the microphones and you talk, and if you feel like you want to talk, there's a bunch of stuff out there that piques your interest, and all you have to do is like pursue it, pull at the thread, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, like I've been wanting, and we're gonna do it this year, like to do an episodic show, like something small, just as like a Keys palate cleanser, and also to reinvigorate that curiosity that I used to have of like, I want to know about this mystery and I want to see it through, and I think Keys has kind of like sucked the life out of that, and so I'm excited to be like, oh, here's this documentary about 5 things, but like let's drill down on this one thing that seems like overshadowed.
Yeah.
So Josh, I want to ask you about this, and feel free to edit it out, but this is something I wanted to ask you about anyway. But when two parts of my question. So you started this Keys podcast, Israel Keys, and did you ever think that it was how many episodes have you done on Keys? Have you lost track?
At least 120.
Yeah. Did you ever imagine that you would?
There's supposed to be one season.
Yeah, because at one point you did a season about like somebody else, and then you went back to the Keys case, right?
Yeah, so like True Crime Bullshit, the whole premise was going to be like an investigative series where each season was a different subject, but like the subtext was going to be like how it contributes to bad true crime or like how
Right.
the case contributes to bad true crime. And then I got towards the end of the season. I was like, well, there's still so much here, and like I have a bunch of questions left. And I think it became so victim focused that it just felt weird to like leave it where it was. And so I was like, all right, I'll do one more season. And then I did. And then I had already started working on the Kelly Cochran season, which was just such a different story because this woman is
Yeah.
like a circus freak. And
Yeah.
while I was doing the Kelly season, like I kept researching keys just out of my own interest. And I
Right.
always kind of knew we'd come back to it, but I didn't think we would A, come back to it so soon and then B, like stay with it for so long. But my biggest fear is like I didn't want to be that show that was like stretching something out longer than it needed to be. And I don't think we've done that. There have been days where I'm like, maybe we should have ended last season, but then something happens or something comes up and you're like, no, there's still a lot of work to do here. But I
And
like
what's the future of it? Like, what do you envision? Or are you just kind of like kind of going with it and seeing where it goes?
every season, I'm like, this is the last season. And then like this was going to be the last season. And then we got, open communication with the FBI. We found two pretty significant new leads. And then the conversations with the FBI were like, okay, well, like, there's at least one more season now. And then now we've lined up another interview with a different FBI agent. And it's like, and we have a FOIA that they told us has a 6-year turnaround time. So I'm like, so what am I gonna
Oh,
like end the show and then 4 years later get all this documentation? So I
right.
don't know. Like, I can't, it's not sustainable anymore to do it in the way that I used to do it. And I will never get tired of investigating keys, but I sometimes get tired of talking about keys.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because you're living in it. I mean, it's not just like the listeners are just listening to episodes, but you're marinating in it all the time, right? Like even in your sleep, I would imagine.
Well, and it's like that's to a lot of people, that's who I am now, even though like to me that's not who I am.
Yeah.
And
At all.
I was telling someone like my grandma died, and I just remember like I was communicating with my cousins about her death and like what we were supposed to do, and like Facebook messages kept coming in being like, what about this? And do you think this? And like, do you think Keys was here? And I was like, this is too much.
This is my personal like family.
Yeah.
Like we're not,
Yeah.
yeah, the two like George Costanza and the two worlds. Yeah. And so what about like there's this new Hulu doc on
Yeah.
Keith. I haven't watched it. Like what can we talk about that or is that like
I mean, I
sensitive?
never signed anything, so I guess we can. I was supposed to be in it. I was the first person they contacted. We talked, I don't know, probably like 6 hours, phone calls, just phone calls alone, which I was just off the heels of doing another documentary for AMC.
Mhm.
And I think I have a bad tendency to like change my point of view based on my most recent experience. And like that was such a positive experience. And so I was like, okay, like, and I'd done 2020 and that was a positive experience. And they're both ABC, the Hulu doc in 2020. And so I was like, all right, I feel good like sharing some information before we get attorneys involved. And the guy I talked to had made some pretty sweeping promises, like bare minimum, you'll be an executive producer, and like we'll
Mhm.
probably have like 40 minute or 40% of it devoted to you on screen. And I was like, cool. And like I know, and I know Javier, like no one in our positions does TV for the money. And
No,
so I was like, it's just going to be cool to like collaborate with people and to get like
yeah,
some free promotion for the podcast.
sure.
And after I'd shared tons of information, we got attorneys involved, and essentially like what they were going to pay me ended up being less than I was going to have to pay my attorney to negotiate the contract, which I was fine with. But then they were like, okay, so like we were able to get some bigger names, is the thing they actually said to me. And we don't think we're going to use you in the show, but we still want to use your research. And if you could send us these files and this B-roll. And I was like,
Yep. I
oh,
had
like,
the same exact problem
That's
with
ins-
I was on Netflix. I did this they used I mean and look, it was a positive experience overall. I loved it. The show turned out great. It was awesome and it got some exposure to pretend which is what I guess originally I was going to get out of it anyway. But I was just looking around and thinking these people, like this production company, like took my research contact, like, and then I was like you, I was supposed to be one of the main, contributors, and then I got whittled out to like the third episode, and I just felt like the further along the process went, like the more I was getting edged out of it, and I was like, man, I just feel like a lot of these production companies are poaching content creators like us, because we're doing the work. We're like, you're getting these FOIA requests. I mean, this stuff is not easy work, and they're just like swooping in and making a TV show and just like taking the credit for it. And I don't know that I have a problem with that too. It's like
It's the
not that I
new like
want money, but
artist exposure thing where they're like,
yeah,
we can't pay you, but we'll give you exposure.
Yeah,
right,
I've heard that too many times to even be satisfied with and
yeah,
like you guys both have said, it's like sometimes you just take it because it's a good look, or
yeah.
you can add a credit to your list, or just for me also, when I first started, I did stand up. I was too much of a coward to like drop everything and move to New York and really give it a good go, which is
Yeah.
hilarious to me now because now that I'm doing podcasts, I'm like going on flights and driving to festivals, and
Right.
I'm like, I could have, I could have, if I had more courage.
You
I
could
could,
still do it. Now you have an
yeah,
audience. You
for
could probably
sure.
fill the place up.
Yeah, it's a thought, but like it just is like the like the people who have now come in to see something that is born out of podcasting, like a story about a dating app killer or something like that, is born in these intimate, in ear audible journeys, and then they feel the buzz come around and they're like, how do we make this sexy? And then they take all the people who did all the work and everything, and then they're like, what if like Paris Hilton was telling this story, and they want to give your information and your passion and all the work that you did to somebody else to tell the story, and whittle you out. And that's where the ethics part comes in, because they don't care, like they just want to tell a story. I've heard so many
Right.
stories of people who are like actual advocates for victims, like their family member was murdered, and they asked to be they call them in to be a part of a documentary, and they're like, so we're gonna like, we want this to be like sexy and like a thriller, and they're like, well, I'd like some care to be given to my
Mhm.
family member. They're like, all right, well, stop contacting them. Let's go ahead and get one of the dudes from Property Brothers to come on here, and they'll talk about it, and it'll be fun. And that happens so much. And like we started off when we were talking about this, is I think that there's a wave that's come in that's like people that not only do the true crime podcasting, but the consumer is like, that's not right. Like that's this is like that's a wrong way to do this. And I think
Yeah.
that that's cool. And I like that wave of change.
I had to have a tough conversation with someone the other day who wanted to reach out to a TV production company. And I was like, no one who's smart gets into podcasting for money.
Mm.
They get into it because they care about investigating or talking about crimes from a perspective or a lens that other people aren't. So like people in TV get into true crime for the money. Like they are not
Full
having to
stop. Full
pour,
stop.
yeah, they don't have to put blood, sweat, and tears into it for years at a time to like make a dime. They're gonna make money no matter what they do. So they don't give a fuck about the investigation. They are only interested in telling a story that's gonna make them money. And like the only part you can play in that is like, can you bring them an audience and can you give them credibility? And it just like I've had to learn the hard way, like you are just a cog in the machine. You are a reason for someone else to make money off of your hard work. And I remember
Yeah.
that the Hulu people, they were like, well, thank you. And I was like, fuck you. I don't want to thank you in the credits. Like, fuck off.
Yeah. I mean, I get contacted all the time by these production companies, and I have to say they're now that taking my experience from that Netflix doc, and I've done Discover ID stuff. It's the same stuff, right? But I have met some serious production companies that really do want to partner, and because like my thing is, like you said, Josh, I just want to have some say in the story and how it's told. And I don't want to just like slap my face on there and then I don't. Could you imagine you do this interview and you have no content control, so you don't know what they're saying around you, and then you find out when it airs on national television. I mean, like that's terrifying. So I never want I mean, I feel like I have some sort of responsibility to the victims or to the story to tell it the way I feel is right, you know? But maybe I'm a control freak. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's both. Like that, it turned out it was a blessing I didn't end up doing the Hulu thing because I
Oh,
found their
really?
coverage kind of gross. And then
Oh, really?
also when I did the AMC thing, which was less about Keys and more about me, I like every night when we wrapped, I was like, okay, what did I say that they can take out of context? Like, how am I going to get fucked on this? And
Right.
thankfully they didn't. I mean, there were a few like
Good.
small things, but yeah, it's terrifying and you have no control unless you're an EP.
Yeah. I imagine that that's how our guests feel now that you talk about it. I was like,
Well, I send most of my guests. I'm like, okay,
I
here's the
guess that
final
guy
product.
I guess that's why that guy wanted to get paid. But,
You're gonna,
but
yeah.
yeah,
I don't
I
know how this
get
is gonna turn out, so let me put some money in my pocket. You
yeah.
know.
But it's funny like the amount of people that think that we pay our guests. Like I would never pay a guest
Well,
for
ethic
and
journal
under any circumstance. Yeah.
it's unethical journalistically. Like because
Right.
then they feel the pressure to give you what you want rather than the
Right.
truth.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I did find, no, I won't say that. Yeah, I'll tell you. I found Sacha Baron Cohen's release form.
Hmm.
So if you guys ever want that, that gets you out of a lot of trouble. If he could get Rudy Giuliani to lay in bed and like put his hands in his pants and get away with it, yeah, that's awesome.
Well, I have the same question for you guys. Like, where do you see this going? Because I live in constant fear that the bottom's going to fall out at any moment, and then I'm going to need to like have a new career. Like, what
Mhm.
is your plan B?
I got one if unless you have one, Alvin.
Oh, you go, you go.
I would love to one day, like get out of the true crime space. Like, not entirely, but like right now, pretend is my number one thing, you know? And sometimes I just get tired of the negativity, right? And so, like, right now, I'm developing a concept that I've had for years, and it's not crime related. And I'm going to test it out with my Patreon supporters at first and just see how it goes. And if it works, I want to put like all the chips on the table with that concept because I think it would be personally fulfilling for me, and maybe I won't be known as the con artist guy, you know, forever.
That's a cool moniker
So,
though. Like
yeah.
you're gonna be known as.
And I'm not done with pretend. I still have fun doing it, but I just don't know like when you zoom out and like look for the next 5, 10 years, you know, I don't
Yeah,
know. Am I still going to be doing this? Are you still going to be doing keys or, you know,
I hope
doing
not.
dark humor and Alvin's show, you know?
I feel like once the passion goes, it- that 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 will be the moment for a real conversation. Even though Josh, I fully agree with you. I'm always like, I mean, eventually people are gonna stop wearing headphones, right? Like the future's coming. Like something's gonna happen where people don't listen to people talk while they cook or something. I'm always
I
just
don't
like,
think so.
people will stop listening to things. That's always like my inner like you need to figure out something else. But for me, I aside from the podcast, I would love to just start like getting in front of people more. Like whether that's
Yeah.
I have these ideas to do some kind of variety style live show where we go in
Mm.
and go into a city and then have a nice entertaining show, but also highlight a story, a case from each town. Maybe raise a glass to a cold case, or have a person who's been affected by a case come up, and we just talk about the person, not about the murder, not about the cold case. Just have them talk to us about the experience with their brother, their son, their cousin, and just have a moment to just in to celebrate people, because I feel like when you talk so much about these stories, the humanity gets lost. But I'd love to have a moment, and even if that's another podcast pivot of like just talking to people who have experienced this loss, but talk about it in a positive light, not just come to them about the sadness. But also, and I don't, it's not an idea that I have fully flushed out, so I'm cool to talk about it a little bit. I would love one day to do me and my co-host do a TV show. I think that there's so many um couch detectives out there who don't know the ins and outs of the investigative process, and we're also those people. I mean, we're very much amateur. I don't do deep dives. I filed a couple of FOIAs, like not to toot my own horn, but we're very much amateurish, and I feel like people seeing two people learn that process. I have this image in my head of like one day going to a body farm. I don't even know if you can or not. I don't know if you're legally allowed to, but I would love to just go and experience that and like learn the things that we talk so confidently about in an Arby's drive-through. Like, yeah, man, I bet
Yeah.
I could have solved this case. And I want people to see how difficult and how intricate some of these things are so we can really understand that as interested and fascinated as we are about a lot of these things, people go to school and learn techniques and sciences, and they're not frauds like the guy Javier described. There are people who really learn like make breakthroughs in science, and I think there's a fun way to break that down to people because sometimes it gets a little like word heavy of like how when you're talking about microorganisms and DNA, riboflavin, all these things, like it just gets very
Yeah.
big, and I think we could make it a simplified version that people could have a good time learning about.
I want that for you, and I want that for me.
Well,
Alvin,
I didn't say who my co-host would be.
you were saying that like, in the future there might not be headphones and like people might not be listening to podcasts. Well, I remember when I was in college, so I graduated college in 2003.
Mhm.
You had to like I picked journalism as my major, and there were the newspaper guys, the radio guys, the TV guys, and the internet guys, because like the internet was just
Yeah.
taking off, right? And so I remember walking past the radio guys and thinking, these what a bunch of morons. Like radio is dead, right? And I'm thinking like the medium is dead. And yeah, maybe terrestrial radio is not what it was, but radio is not dead. I mean,
Yeah.
we've proven that for like the last God knows how many years. I mean, podcasting, whether podcasting is how people consume us in the future, I don't know, but like human connections, like I feel that even just what we're doing right now, we're just like talking, and like the people that are listening right now, they're just hanging out. And I feel that connection when I listen to shows. Like sometimes I feel like I could talk about anything and I don't think my audience would care because they just are connecting with me. Like we form some sort of friendship. Like I feel like even with my Patreon supporters, I feel like I built like a group of like-minded people, right? Like
A community. Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
and or we just carved out our own little space in the world. And we're all adults now, and like we know how hard it is to make friendships now as adults. Like it's like when we were in high school, it was so easy, but like now it's hard. And so we go to Reddit and subreddits and podcasts to find our crew. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we're these are the people that we hang out with because we're social creatures, and I don't think that will ever change. So maybe the way we consume it will change, but we're always going to be talking smack with each other, with people that
That's a
agree
fact.
with us. Yeah.
That's a fact. That's a fact.
I interviewed this First Nations gentleman. I think he was in his like 70s for Our Americana like a decade ago. And he was like, "What's a podcast?" And I was like explaining it to him. And he was like, "Oh, like a radio show." And I was like,
All right.
"Yeah, yeah, that's it. That's totally
Yeah.
exactly what it is."
Exactly. Yes.
I do think like storytelling has been with us since the dawn of humanity. It's not going anywhere, and maybe like the medium will change, but I think, in terms of like what we do, people will always have an interest in journalism. People will always have an interest in true crime, and people will always have an interest in like sharing stories. And that's the one thing that like helps me sleep at night or like helps me like pay for a vacation is to be like, okay, I will be able to pay off this credit card.
I can
You know
adapt.
what?
Yeah.
After, I just didn't realize until recently, maybe it was during the election that it became clear to me that how powerful this medium is. It's more powerful now than TV or whatever. Like candidates are going to talk to podcasters, right? Because we have that much. I mean, can you think of another medium where people will just devote like 30 minutes, an hour and a half to you, like we
No.
live in a TikTok world, like
Yeah.
5 seconds swipe, and here we have people actually listening to us. I mean, that's a lot of power. Obviously, neither the three of us aren't any Joe Rogans or whatever, but
Thank
they're
God.
yeah, thank God. But
But the
but it is
retention rate of a podcast is insane. To be able to hold somebody's attention for 2 hours is
yeah.
it's an ability that I think that when we go even to go back to what we were talking about, like when you first start, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, like these figuring out these chunks of time, for me to now know how to fill an hour and a half worth of time and feel confident that I could put that out and there are people who will digest an hour and a half of talking. That's a great point, Javier. It's like,
Have you ever tried to visualize your audience like per episode? Because you know how like we do ad rates per like how many listeners did you get for one episode
Yeah.
in a 30-day period? And I bet all of our shows, like it's about the size of a small city. Like if you ever try to visualize that, like
It's
that's
insane.
crazy.
Yeah.
Isn't that nuts?
Especially because like for me, I mean, Josh, I can't speak for you. I've been to your office and it is nice. So when you're creating in a space like that, it does feel very professional. But for me, I mean, when we went to our first convention and we had people lining up to talk to us, we were coming from my basement.
Right.
So like we just went to just kind of get the experience, and then somebody comes up to you and like, "Oh my God, I live in Texas and I love your show." It's like, what are you talking about? Like nobody listens to
Isn't that
this.
crazy?
We just sit and do this and we just put it into the ether. Like there's nobody that listens to this. And to learn that there are a lot of people that listen to it, objectively, but there are a lot of people that listen to this. It is a very like humbling experience, especially when you think about like the impetus of starting this, which is like me, at least me personally, I like went to Guitar Center and bought the crappiest mic they had and a little box that you put wires into. And I just talked with my friend for 35 minutes. And to think about that to now is like, yeah, that's insane. Like it's insane to me that there is to even use the word audience.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
I was
because
like,
yeah. I mean,
oh,
I
I was
recorded in my
recording.
closet too, so
I was recording in a closet, like not even a walk-in, just like I would like move the clothes
yeah,
and then like
that's
stick
how I
my face
record.
in. And I was on like food stamps. I was so broke. I was like, I can't afford to eat, and I'm like hitching my entire life on a podcast. And I mean, fucking thank God it worked out because my marriage certainly wouldn't have.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's nuts. I still record in the closet and I'm still having to part clothes to make sure. Yeah,
He
it's nuts.
says with an Emmy strategically placed behind him.
Oh, yeah. It's just
Well,
chocolate filled.
sure.
The Cadbury.
Yeah.
This was fun, and I feel like we need to do these more often. I think,
Oh,
like
yeah.
Javier, you said you missed playlist, and I think this has the same ethos
Yeah.
as playlist. And
Yeah.
yeah, it was cool. But thanks, guys.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd love to
This
do
is awesome.
That's super fun.
Yeah.